What happened next in this five-star restaurant would change 2 lives forever and create a foundation that saved 10,000 children. But what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about family love and second chances. The words fell into the hushed elegance of Le Bernardin like a stone through glass. "Excuse me, sir. Could you spare some food? I haven't eaten in 2 days." Jonathan Mitchell looked up from his untouched Dover sole, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The restaurant's soft lighting caught the surprise in his steel-gray eyes as he took in the small figure standing beside his table. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Her dark skin was ashen with cold and hunger, her hair twisted into matted braids that spoke of weeks without proper care. She wore a torn purple sweater that hung loose on her thin frame, and her feet were bare despite the December snow falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. But it was her eyes that stopped Jonathan's breath. Large brown, and filled with a dignity that no child should have to carry, they looked at him without shame or apology, only quiet desperation. "My name is Sophia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear as crystal. "Sophia Williams, and I'm really, really hungry." The restaurant had gone completely silent. 60 of New York's elite, their conversations about hedge funds and Hampton houses, cut short by this impossible intrusion. Crystal glasses hovered motionless in manicured hands. Servers stood frozen between tables, their silver trays catching the light like shields. "There's a vagrant in here," someone hissed from a corner booth. "Call security immediately." "I'm already calling the police," muttered a woman in pearls, her phone pressed to her ear. "This is absolutely unacceptable." But what happened next would shock everyone in that room. Because Jonathan Mitchell, worth $3 billion and known for his cold business demeanor, was about to make a decision that would change everything. He stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding from the chair with deliberate care. At 42, he was still lean and sharp-featured, his dark hair beginning to show silver at the temples. He wore a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than most people made in a month, but none of that mattered now. He looked down at Sophia, and something deep in his chest cracked open. "What's your favorite food, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. Sophia blinked, confusion flickering across her features. "I don't know. Anything. Please." Jonathan pulled out the chair across from his own and gestured to it. "Would you like to join me for dinner?" The reaction was immediate and explosive. "You cannot be serious," gasped a woman at the neighboring table. "This is Le Bernardin, not a soup kitchen," someone else snapped. "The health department will shut this place down," another voice chimed in. But Jonathan heard none of it. His attention was focused entirely on the small girl who was staring at the offered chair as if it might disappear if she blinked. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." But what Jonathan didn't know was that this moment was being recorded. A young man in glasses at a corner booth had already started filming, and within minutes, the footage would be uploaded with the caption that would make them both famous. Billionaire CEO shares 5-star dinner with homeless girl, heartwarming, or publicity stunt. The photo would be on social media within minutes. By morning, it would be on every news network in the country, but Jonathan couldn't bring himself to care about any of that right now. Sophia approached the chair with the cautious grace of someone who'd learned not to trust kindness too quickly. She climbed up her feet, dangling several inches from the floor, and placed her small hands flat on the white tablecloth, as if to anchor herself to this impossible moment. "Have you ever had lobster bisque?" Jonathan asked, signaling to a nearby server. Sophia shook her head, eyes wide. "Well then, we're going to start there." But before the server could respond, the restaurant's heavy doors burst open, and 2 NYPD officers stepped inside their uniforms, dark against the warm lighting. They scanned the room with practiced eyes before focusing on the unlikely pair at table 12. "We got a call about a minor trespassing," the first officer said, approaching the table. "She's not trespassing," Jonathan said, rising from his chair. "She's my guest." The second officer, older and more weathered, frowned. "This your daughter, sir?" "No," Jonathan replied without hesitation, "but she's under my protection." What the officers didn't know was that Jonathan Mitchell had spent his own childhood in the foster care system. He knew exactly what it felt like to be unwanted, to be hungry, to be seen as a problem rather than a person. And he wasn't about to let that happen to this brave little girl. Jonathan reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a leather card holder. "Jonathan Mitchell, CEO of Sterling Capital," he said, handing his card to the older officer. "I assure you, officers, this child is welcome here." The officer studied the card, recognition flickering in his eyes. Sterling Capital was a name that carried serious weight in financial circles, and Jonathan Mitchell was known for his philanthropy as much as his business acumen. "Mr. Mitchell," the officer said carefully, "we appreciate your generosity, but if she's unaccompanied, we need to contact Child Services." "Give me 48 hours, Jonathan said quietly. "Let me figure out how to help her properly." The officers exchanged glances. The younger one looked at Sophia, who was clutching the napkin in her lap like a lifeline. "We'll wait outside," the older officer decided. 48 hours, Mr. Mitchell. Then we'll need to involve the proper authorities." As the officers left, Sophia looked up at Jonathan with those impossibly wise eyes. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked. The question hit him like a physical blow. Jonathan thought of his own childhood, of the group homes and foster families who'd seen him as nothing more than a burden, a tax write-off, a problem to be managed. He thought of all the business meetings, contracts, and polished dinners that meant nothing compared to this child's raw, quiet pain. "Because someone should have been nice to me when I was your age," he said, his voice barely audible above the resumed conversations around them. Sophia nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. She picked up her spoon with careful deliberation and took a small sip of the bisque that had appeared before her. Her eyes widened with wonder. "It tastes like the ocean," she whispered, "but warm." And just like that, Jonathan Mitchell's carefully constructed world began to change forever. But what you don't know yet is that Sophia's story was even more heartbreaking than it appeared. Because the little girl sitting across from him had a secret that would soon test everything he thought he knew about family love and sacrifice. To understand how a billionaire CEO and a homeless 9-year-old could sit across from each other in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, you have to understand their stories. Two lives that had been shaped by loss, running on parallel tracks toward this moment of intersection. Jonathan's story began in a cramped apartment in Queens, where his teenage mother struggled to raise him alone after his father disappeared before his first birthday. Sarah Mitchell was 17 when she had Jonathan, 18 when she died in a car accident, leaving her toddler son to navigate the city's overwhelmed foster care system. He bounced between homes for the next 15 years. Some families were kind, but overextended. Others saw foster children as monthly paychecks. A few were actively harmful, and Jonathan learned early to keep his head down, his grades up, and his dreams to himself. The memory that haunted him most was Christmas morning when he was 12. He'd been placed with the Morrison family for 6 months longer than any previous placement. He'd started to believe just maybe that this could be permanent. He'd even bought small gifts for the other children, with money he'd earned doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. But that Christmas morning, Mrs. Morrison sat him down with a cup of coffee and a serious expression. "Jonathan, honey," she said, "we've decided to adopt the baby, but we can't afford to keep you too. Your caseworker will be here after New Year's." He'd nodded politely, thanked them for their honesty, and spent the rest of Christmas Day packing his few belongings while the family celebrated around him. That night, lying in bed listening to laughter from the living room, 12-year-old Jonathan made himself a promise. Someday, he would have enough money and power that no one could ever make him leave again. At 17, he aged out of the system with nothing but a scholarship to NYU's business school and an unshakable determination to never be powerless again. He worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, sleeping 4 hours a night, and living on ramen noodles and ambition. His breakthrough came during his senior year when he developed an algorithm for predicting market volatility. A small investment firm took notice, then a larger one. Then Goldman Sachs came calling. By 25, he was managing other people's money. By 30, he was managing billions of it. By 35, he'd launched Sterling Capital and was featured on the cover of Forbes. But success came at a cost. Jonathan threw himself into work with the same intensity that had gotten him out of Queens, and relationships became casualties. He'd been engaged twice, but both women eventually left, unable to compete with his obsession with building something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away. At 42, he lived alone in a $40 million penthouse on the Upper East Side, surrounded by art and silence. He was worth $3 billion on paper, but couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed or felt truly connected to another human being. Every night, he ate dinner alone. Until tonight. But Sophia's story was different, and in many ways, even more heartbreaking. Sophia's journey began in a small apartment in the Bronx, where she lived with her grandmother, Ruby Williams. Ruby had raised 4 children of her own and was in her 70s when Sophia came to live with her, after her daughter Sophia's mother died from complications related to diabetes when Sophia was 4. Ruby Williams was a retired nurse who'd spent 40 years working in Harlem Hospital's pediatric ward. She was fierce and loving in equal measure, filling their tiny apartment with the smell of cornbread and the sound of old gospel records. She read to Sophia every night, stories about brave little girls who conquered dragons and changed the world. "You're going to be a doctor someday," Ruby would tell her granddaughter, pointing to her collection of medical textbooks. "You're going to help children feel better just like I did." Sophia believed her completely. She was bright and curious, always asking questions about how things worked, why people got sick, what made flowers grow. She drew pictures of herself in a white coat with a stethoscope around her neck, smiling beside tiny patients. Their life wasn't easy. Ruby's Social Security barely covered rent and groceries, but it was rich with love and possibility. Sophia excelled in school, bringing home gold stars and perfect attendance certificates that Ruby taped to the refrigerator with obvious pride. But what Sophia didn't know was that her grandmother was keeping a secret. Ruby had been feeling increasingly weak and short of breath, but she didn't want to worry her granddaughter. She'd been putting off doctor visits, telling herself it was just old age, just fatigue from caring for an active 8-year-old. Then COVID-19 arrived. Ruby caught it in March 2020, just as the city was shutting down. She'd been volunteering at a community health clinic, helping elderly neighbors navigate the confusing world of telemedicine and prescription deliveries. At 78, she was in the highest risk category, but she couldn't stop herself from helping others. The night before she was hospitalized, Ruby sat Sophia down at their small kitchen table. The apartment felt different, charged with the weight of unspoken fears and impending change. "Baby girl Ruby," said her voice more serious than Sophia had ever heard it. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Sophia nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment, even though she didn't understand what was coming. "If something happens to me, if I have to go to the hospital and can't come back right away, I want you to remember something. You are smart, you are beautiful, you are worthy of love, and you are destined for great things. Don't let anybody tell you different." She pulled out a small leather journal and pressed it into Sophia's hands. This has all my thoughts about you, all my dreams for your future. Keep it safe, and when you're older, you'll understand. Grandma Ruby. Sophia said, her voice small with fear. Are you going to be okay? Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. I'm going to fight as hard as I can, baby. But if I can't win this fight, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. Ruby spent 3 weeks in the hospital, while 8-year-old Sophia stayed with a neighbor. Ruby fought as hard as she could, but her body was tired, and the virus was relentless. She died on a Tuesday morning in April alone because of visiting restrictions, while Sophia waited by the phone for updates that would never come. The neighbor who'd been watching Sophia was elderly herself and couldn't take on permanent guardianship. Social services stepped in, placing Sophia in a foster home in Queens, while they looked for relatives who might take her in. But there were no relatives. Ruby's other children had died or moved away years ago, and Sophia's father had never been in the picture. She became another file in an overwhelmed system, another child shuffled between temporary placements. The first foster home was overcrowded and chaotic. 7 children in a 3-bedroom house with parents more interested in managing behavior than nurturing growth. Sophia, still grieving and traumatized, was seen as difficult when she cried at night or had trouble concentrating on schoolwork. The second placement was with the Hendersons, a couple who seemed kind at first, but gradually revealed their true priorities. They were more interested in the monthly stipend than the children in their care. Sophia's medical appointments were skipped to save gas money. Her school supplies came from the dollar store. When she asked for help with homework, she was told to figure it out herself. But it was the third placement that broke something in Sophia's spirit. The Martinez family lived in a cramped apartment where the adults drank heavily and fought constantly. The other foster children had learned to make themselves invisible, and they taught Sophia to do the same. But invisibility wasn't enough. When Mr. Martinez came home drunk and angry, someone always became a target. Usually, it was Marcus, a 12-year-old boy who'd been in the system for 5 years. But sometimes it was Sophia, especially when she asked questions or showed any sign of the intelligence that Ruby had so carefully nurtured. The breaking point came on a rainy night in November. Mr. Martinez had been drinking since dinner, and Mrs. Martinez was passed out on the couch. Marcus had accidentally spilled juice on the carpet, and Mr. Martinez exploded into a rage that sent the boy running to hide in the bathroom. But when Sophia tried to clean up the spill, trying to protect Marcus from further punishment, Mr. Martinez turned his anger on her. The words he used were cruel and racist, designed to break her spirit and make her feel worthless. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the adults fight in the next room, Sophia made a decision. She remembered Ruby's words about being destined for great things, about being worthy of love. And she knew that staying in this house would kill something inside her that Ruby had spent years nurturing. So at 3 a.m, while the house was finally quiet, 9-year-old Sophia Williams gathered her few belongings and walked out into the November rain. She'd rather take her chances on the street than spend another day in a place where she was made to feel like she didn't matter. For 3 weeks, she lived in the shadows of the city. She learned which subway stations stayed warm all night, which restaurant dumpsters had the freshest discarded food, which security guards would chase her away, and which ones would pretend not to see her. She was smaller than most 9-year-olds, which helped her avoid attention. She'd learned to move quietly through the city's shadows to make herself invisible when necessary. But hunger had finally driven her to desperation. And then she saw Le Bernardin. The warm light spilling from the restaurant's windows drew her like a moth to flame. She'd never been in a place so beautiful, had never imagined such places existed. Through the windows, she could see well-dressed people eating what looked like the most delicious food in the world. For 20 minutes, she stood outside in the snow, watching and working up courage. She knew she didn't belong there. She knew they would probably call the police. But she was so hungry and so tired and so lonely that she was willing to risk anything for the chance that someone might show her kindness. And so she walked through those heavy doors, approached the man sitting alone at table 12, the one who looked almost as lonely as she felt, and asked the question that would change both their lives forever. "Can I eat with you?" But what Sophia didn't know was that Jonathan's decision to help her would set off a chain of events that would test everything they both believed about family love and belonging. Because the world wasn't ready for a billionaire white man to adopt a homeless black child, and the battles they would face were just beginning. The drive from Le Bernardin to Jonathan's penthouse took 20 minutes through Manhattan traffic, but it felt like crossing between worlds. Sophia sat in the back of Jonathan's Tesla, her small form nearly swallowed by the leather seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. She'd never been in a car this nice. She'd never been in a car at all, actually, except for the social services transport van that had moved her between foster homes. This was different, quiet and warm, with soft music playing from invisible speakers. "Are you warm enough?" Jonathan asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Sophia nodded, though she was still shivering. The restaurant's heat hadn't fully penetrated the cold that seemed to live in her bones, now the kind of cold that came from sleeping on concrete and eating from garbage cans. "We're almost there," he said gently. "I have some clothes that might fit you, and we can get you a warm bath." The word bath almost made her cry. She hadn't had a real bath in weeks, just quick washes in public restroom sinks, when she could manage it without being caught. But what Jonathan didn't realize was that bringing Sophia home would force him to confront his own demons. Because taking care of a traumatized child would awaken memories of his own childhood trauma that he'd spent decades burying beneath success and ambition. The penthouse building was on Fifth Avenue, directly across from Central Park. The doorman, a kind-faced man named William, greeted Jonathan with professional warmth that faltered slightly when he saw Sophia. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell," William said, holding the door open. "Good evening, William. This is Sophia. She'll be staying with me for a while." If William had questions about the small, disheveled girl accompanying his usually solitary tenant, he kept them to himself. "Of course, sir." "Miss Sophia." Sophia looked up at him with wide eyes. No adult had called her Miss anything in a long time. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 40 seconds, but Sophia felt her ears pop from the height. When the doors opened directly into Jonathan's apartment, she stepped out and froze. The space was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline beyond. The furniture was modern and expensive-looking, all clean lines and muted colors. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, and soft lighting made everything glow with warmth. "Holy cow," Sophia whispered, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "Sorry. Grammy." Ruby said, "That's not polite." Jonathan's chest tightened at the mention of her grandmother. "It's okay. And you're right, it is pretty impressive. I sometimes forget how big it is." As he showed her through the apartment, Jonathan found himself seeing his home through her eyes. The kitchen that was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. The guest room that was bigger than the entire space she'd shared with Grammy Ruby. The bathroom with its marble surfaces and rain shower that looked like something from a palace. "Are you sure I'm allowed to be here?" she asked, her voice small. Jonathan stopped and knelt down to her eye level, just as the police officer had done earlier. But where the officer's attention had been professional, Jonathan's was purely personal. "Sophia," he said, "this is your home now for as long as you need it to be. You don't have to ask permission to exist here, okay?" She studied his face with those two wise eyes, looking for signs of deception, or conditions she'd need to meet. Finding none, she nodded slowly. While Sophia took what would be the longest, warmest bath of her life, Jonathan made phone calls that would change both their futures. He called his assistant, Margaret Chen, and asked her to clear his schedule for the next few days. Then he called his lawyer, Elizabeth Harper, and asked her to research emergency guardianship procedures. Jonathan Elizabeth said carefully, "What exactly are you planning to do?" "I'm going to help her," he said simply. "Help her how foster care. Adoption. You realize this could be incredibly complicated legally and socially." Jonathan looked toward the guest room where Sophia was singing softly, her voice carrying an old gospel song that seemed to fill the entire apartment with something it had been missing. "I don't know yet," he said. "I just know I can't let her go back to whatever she was running from." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "Jonathan, you're a good man, with good intentions. But taking in a child, especially a child of a different race, especially under these circumstances, this is going to attract attention. Are you prepared for that? What kind of attention? The kind that questions your motives. The kind that examines every aspect of your life. The kind that asks whether you're doing this out of genuine love or some kind of savior complex." Jonathan was quiet, processing her words. Then he said, "Elizabeth, 3 hours ago, I was a lonely man eating dinner by himself, going through the motions of a life that had everything except meaning. Now there's a little girl in my bathroom singing hymns, and for the first time in 20 years, this place feels like home. So, whatever attention comes, whatever questions people ask, I'll deal with it. Because she's already changed my life, and I'm not giving that up." When Sophia emerged from the bathroom 40 minutes later, she was transformed. Clean and dressed in soft pink pajamas that Margaret's daughter had quickly provided, her hair washed and braided, she looked like the child she should have been allowed to be all along. But her eyes still held that cautious wariness, the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd learned not to trust good things to last. "Feeling better?" Jonathan asked. She nodded, then surprised him by walking over and wrapping her thin arms around his waist in a quick hug. "Thank you," she whispered into his shirt, "for the food and the bath and for being nice to me." Jonathan's throat closed up completely. He managed to hug her back, his large hands gentle on her small shoulders. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. This is what people are supposed to do for each other." But even as he said the words, Jonathan knew they weren't entirely true. Because most people would have called social services and walked away. Most people would have given her money for food and felt good about their charity. Most people wouldn't have brought a strange child home and changed their entire life in a single evening. So why had he? That night, Jonathan lay awake in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his space. Sophia had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted by weeks of survival. But she'd left her door open just a crack, close enough to feel safe, but far enough to run if she needed to. He thought about the foster homes of his youth, about all the temporary placements and well-meaning adults who'd seen him as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. He thought about the loneliness that had driven him to build walls of money and success, and how easily a 9-year-old girl with gospel songs in her heart had walked right through them. But what he didn't know was that across town, phones were ringing and emails were flying as the photo from Le Bernardin began to spread across social media. By morning, their story would be national news, and their quiet evening of getting to know each other would be replaced by a media circus that would test everything they thought they knew about privacy, family, and love. The morning sun streaming through the penthouse windows found Jonathan in the kitchen at 6 a.m., standing over a stack of pancakes and wondering if 9-year-old girls actually ate pancakes, or if that was just something he'd seen in movies. He'd been awake since 4, his phone buzzing constantly with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his personal number, all wanting statements about the Bernardin incident that was trending on social media under hashtags like Save Sophia and Billionaire Compassion. But all of that could wait. Right now, his primary concern was making sure Sophia woke up to the smell of breakfast and the knowledge that someone cared whether she was hungry. He heard her stirring around 7, the soft padding of bare feet on hardwood, followed by the careful opening of her door. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing the pink pajamas from the night before, her hair still in the neat braids Margaret's daughter had woven. "Good morning," Jonathan said, turning from the stove with what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "I made pancakes. Do you like pancakes?" Sophia nodded but made no move to enter the kitchen. She stood in the doorway like a wild animal, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "Are you sure it's okay?" she asked. "I don't want to take too much." The question broke Jonathan's heart all over again. "Sophia, honey, there's no such thing as taking too much here. This is your home now. That means everything in it is yours too." She considered this carefully, then took a tentative step into the kitchen. "Grammy Ruby used to make pancakes on Sundays," she said quietly. "She put blueberries in them." "I don't have blueberries," Jonathan admitted, "but I have strawberries. Would that work?" For the first time since he'd met her, Sophia smiled. Really smiled. Not just the careful, polite expression she'd worn at the restaurant, but a genuine little girl grin that lit up her entire face. "Strawberries are my favorite," she said. As they ate breakfast together at the kitchen island, Sophia's legs swinging from the tall stool as she worked her way through a stack of pancakes nearly as big as she was, Jonathan found himself watching her with fascination. He noted the careful way she cut each bite into perfect squares, the way she saved the strawberries for last, eating them one by one, like tiny treasures. "Tell me about Grammy Ruby," he said gently. Sophia's face grew soft with memory. She was a nurse. She helped sick babies get better. She said I was going to be a doctor someday and help babies too. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Do you still want to be a doctor? I think so. But I don't know if I can anymore. She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. Grammy Ruby said I needed to go to college to be a doctor, but college costs lots of money. Money isn't something you need to worry about, Jonathan said firmly. If you want to be a doctor, we'll figure out how to make that happen. Sophia studied his face with those penetrating eyes. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. It was a fair question, and one Jonathan had been asking himself since the moment he'd stood up in Le Bernardin. Why had he gotten involved? Why had he brought her home? Why was he sitting here making promises about college and medical school to a child he'd known for 12 hours? But before he could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something told him to answer it. Mr. Mitchell. The voice was official, businesslike. This is Agent Sarah Martinez from the Department of Child Welfare. I understand you have a minor child in your custody without proper authorization. Jonathan felt his blood run cold. I can explain. Sir, I'm going to need you to remain calm and cooperate fully. We're sending a team to your location to assess the situation and ensure the child's safety. She's safe, Jonathan said, his voice tight with controlled panic. She's fed, she's clean, she's warm, and she's protected. I'm sure you believe that, sir. But we have procedures that must be followed. We'll be there within the hour. As Jonathan hung up the phone, Sophia looked at him with those two perceptive eyes. Are we in trouble? She asked. No, sweetheart, Jonathan said, but his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there moments before. We're not in trouble, but some people are coming to make sure you're okay and safe. What if they want to take me away? The question hit Jonathan like a physical blow. The thought of losing Sophia now, after just one night of having her in his life, was unbearable. But he couldn't lie to her. "I won't let that happen," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. But what Jonathan didn't know was that the Department of Child Welfare had already made their decision. A billionaire white man taking in a homeless black child without going through proper channels looked suspicious regardless of his intentions. And in less than an hour, their quiet morning of pancakes and tentative bonding would be interrupted by a knock on the door that would change everything. The war for Sophia's future began with that knock at 8 a.m., exactly 18 hours after she'd walked into Le Bernardin. Jonathan answered it to find Agent Martinez flanked by 2 police officers and a woman he didn't recognize, tall, severe-looking, with the kind of official bearing that meant trouble. "Mr. Mitchell." Agent Martinez said, her voice carefully neutral. "This is Director Patricia Hawkins from the Department of Child Welfare. We need to speak with you and Sophia." Director Hawkins stepped forward with the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Mitchell, we've completed our preliminary investigation, and we have serious concerns about this placement." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Behind him, Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, drawn by the voices. When she saw the official delegation at the door, her face went pale. "What kind of concerns?" Jonathan asked, not moving aside to let them in. "May we come in?" Director Hawkins asked, though it wasn't really a question. Jonathan reluctantly stepped back and the group filed into his living room. Sophia crept down the stairs and positioned herself behind Jonathan's chair, her small hand resting on his shoulder. Mr. Mitchell, Director Hawkins, began opening a thick folder. "Our investigation has raised several red flags. First, you have no experience with children, no training, no family of your own, no history of working with child welfare organizations." "I'm learning," Jonathan said evenly. "Second, there's the matter of the media attention. This situation has become a circus, which is not in the child's best interest. I didn't create the media attention. I've refused all interview requests." Third, and Director Hawkins' voice grew sharper. "We've received reports that this may be some sort of publicity stunt or tax avoidance scheme." Jonathan shot to his feet. "That's ridiculous. I've spent more money on Sophia in one day than most people make in a month. If this were about money, it would be the worst investment I've ever made. Nevertheless, given the unusual circumstances and the lack of proper procedures being followed, we're removing Sophia from this home effective immediately." The words hit the room like a bomb. Sophia's grip on Jonathan's shoulder tightened convulsively, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. "No," she said, her voice small but clear. "I don't want to go." Director Hawkins softened slightly when she looked at Sophia. "Sweetheart, we're going to find you a nice family." "I have a family," Sophia interrupted, stepping out from behind Jonathan's chair. "I have, Mr. Jonathan." "Sophia," Agent Martinez said gently. "Mr. Mitchell isn't your legal guardian. The state has a responsibility to place you with an approved family. What if I don't want an approved family? What if I want to stay here?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Director Hawkins looked uncomfortable, clearly not used to children who articulated their preferences so clearly. But what happened next would change the entire trajectory of their case. Because at that moment, Elizabeth Harper made her entrance, sweeping into the room with the confidence of someone who'd fought the system before and won. "Director Hawkins," she said briskly, "I assume you have a court order for this removal." Hawkins faltered slightly. "We don't need a court order for emergency removal when a child's welfare is at risk." "And what specific risk has been identified?" "Abuse, neglect, unsafe living conditions. The risk comes from the irregular nature of this placement, which is not grounds for emergency removal under New York family law." Elizabeth interrupted smoothly. "Unless you can demonstrate immediate physical danger, you need either parental consent or a court order. The child has no parents to give consent, which is exactly why Mr. Mitchell is filing for emergency guardianship. Elizabeth pulled a thick stack of papers from her briefcase. These documents were submitted to family court this morning. Director Hawkins' jaw tightened. Filing for guardianship doesn't give him any legal rights until it's granted. Actually, it does. Under New York domestic relations law, the filing creates a temporary custodial relationship pending judicial review. The legal battle continued for another 20 minutes, with Sophia pressed against Jonathan's side, and the officials growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, Director Hawkins stood. "This isn't over, Mr. Mitchell. We'll be watching this situation very closely, and at the first sign that this child's welfare is compromised, we will act." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Jonathan replied, his arm tightening protectively around Sophia. After they left, Sophia dissolved into tears the first time Jonathan had seen her cry since that first night in the restaurant. He held her while she sobbed, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. "They want to take me away," she hiccuped against his chest. "I won't let them," he promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "But what if they can? What if they're stronger than you?" Jonathan pulled back to look at her face, streaked with tears, but still beautiful in its earnestness. "Sophia, I've spent my entire adult life fighting systems that tried to keep me down. I've never lost a fight that mattered, and you matter more than anything I've ever fought for." But what Jonathan didn't tell her was that this fight would be unlike anything he'd ever faced. Because taking on the child welfare system meant confronting not just bureaucracy and legal procedures, but deeply ingrained assumptions about race, class, and family. And the battles ahead would test not just their legal rights, but their very understanding of what it meant to be a family. Over the next 2 weeks, the battle intensified in ways Jonathan had never imagined. Social workers conducted surprise visits at all hours. Psychologists evaluated both Jonathan and Sophia with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for criminal investigations. Family court judges reviewed mountains of paperwork, while the media attention exploded into a national conversation about race, class, and the foster care system. Cable news panels debated their case nightly. One night, Jonathan found himself watching a particularly heated discussion between two pundits. "This is exactly the kind of white savior complex that perpetuates racial inequality," argued Dr. Sophia Williams, a sociology professor. "A wealthy white man swoops in to rescue a black child, and suddenly he's a hero. What about the systemic issues that put her on the street in the first place?" But the other panelist, a family law attorney named David Chen, pushed back. "We're talking about a child who was literally starving. Should we really be criticizing someone for feeding her and giving her a safe place to sleep?" The debate raged on, but Jonathan turned off the television. He couldn't control what people said about their situation, but he could control how he responded to it. Through it all, he and Sophia tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. He had enrolled her in Trinity School, one of Manhattan's most prestigious private schools, where she threw herself into learning with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. Her teachers reported that she was performing at or above grade level in all subjects, despite the educational disruption she'd experienced. "She's remarkable," her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told Jonathan during a parent conference. "Bright, curious kind to the other children. If I didn't know her background, I'd never guess she'd experienced trauma." But the trauma was still there, visible in the way Sophia sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares, or how she hoarded food in her room, despite constant reassurance that there would always be more. She'd started seeing Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in foster care trauma, twice a week. "She's forming a secure attachment," Dr. Foster reported to Jonathan after a month of sessions, which is remarkable given her history. Most children who've experienced her level of disruption struggle with trust for years. What does that mean for the court case? It means that removing her from your care now would be genuinely traumatic. She's finally found stability and safety. taking that away would undo all the progress she's made. The progress was evident in small ways that filled Jonathan's heart. Sophia had stopped flinching when people reached for her. She laughed more often, especially when Jonathan attempted to help her with art projects and failed spectacularly. She'd made friends at school and had been invited to her first sleepover, though she'd politely declined, not ready to spend a night away from the safety of home. But the legal system moved slowly, and every day brought new challenges. The most devastating came when Marcus Williams, Sophia's biological father, was located in Philadelphia, where he was living in a halfway house after completing a drug rehabilitation program. He hadn't seen Sophia in over 4 years, had signed away his rights when Ruby took custody, and had made no effort to contact her during her months in foster care. But blood relationships carry weight in family court, even when they shouldn't. He immediately filed for custody, claiming that his parental rights superseded any guardianship petition. "He hasn't seen her in 4 years," Elizabeth explained to Jonathan over coffee in his office. "He signed away his rights when Ruby took custody, but blood relationships carry weight in family court, even when they shouldn't." What does Sophia want? That's what we'll find out at the hearing next week. The hearing was scheduled for a rainy Thursday in March, in a courthouse downtown that had seen thousands of families torn apart and occasionally miraculously put back together. Jonathan arrived wearing his best suit and his worst fears, with Elizabeth beside him and Sophia holding his hand. The courtroom was packed with reporters, social workers, and curious observers. Judge Patricia Patterson was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Marcus Williams sat across the aisle with his court-appointed attorney. He was thin and nervous-looking, wearing an ill-fitting suit and avoiding eye contact with his daughter. When Sophia saw him, she pressed closer to Jonathan and whispered, "I don't want to talk to him." "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," Jonathan whispered back. But what Marcus didn't know was that his attempt to reclaim Sophia would backfire spectacularly. Because when the judge asked Sophia what she wanted, her answer would be so powerful, so articulate, and so clearly from the heart that it would silence even his lawyer. The proceedings began with testimony from social workers, psychologists, and expert witnesses. Director Hawkins argued that while Mr. Mitchell appeared to be well-intentioned, the irregular nature of the placement and the media attention made it unsuitable for a child's long-term welfare. Marcus Williams took the stand and claimed he was ready to be a father, that his daughter belonged with her real family, and that he'd never intended to abandon her permanently. "I was sick," he said, his voice shaking. "I needed help, but I'm better now. I want my daughter back." Elizabeth systematically dismantled his claims, showing records of his drug arrests, his failure to pay child support, and his complete absence from Sophia's life for nearly 4 years. "Mr. Williams," she said, reading from a court document, "you signed a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights on March 15, 2019. You stated, and I quote, 'I am unable to care for my daughter and believe she would be better served by other arrangements.'" What changed? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I got clean. I got my life together. According to your own testimony, you've been clean for 8 months. Where were you during the 2 years before that? Where were you when your daughter was bouncing between foster homes? Where were you when she was sleeping on the streets?" "I didn't know," Marcus said weakly. "You didn't know because you didn't try to know," Elizabeth replied sharply. "You made no effort to contact child services, no attempt to locate your daughter, no inquiry into her welfare. You abandoned her completely, and now that she's found stability and happiness, you want to disrupt that for your own convenience." Then it was Jonathan's turn to testify. "Mr. Mitchell, Judge Patterson said this is highly unusual. You have no legal relationship to this child, no experience with children, and no extended family to provide support. Why should this court grant you guardianship Jonathan stood up slowly, his hands steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. Your Honor, I know this looks unusual from the outside. A billionaire businessman who meets a homeless child in a restaurant and decides to adopt her. I understand why people are skeptical. He paused, looking directly at Sophia, who was watching him with complete trust in her eyes. But what those people don't understand is that Sophia didn't just ask me for food that night. She saved my life. I was successful, but empty, wealthy, but alone. I had everything money could buy, and nothing that actually mattered. His voice grew stronger. Sophia taught me what it means to love someone more than yourself. She taught me that family isn't about biology or convenience. It's about showing up every day and choosing to care for each other. He turned back to the judge. I know I'm not perfect. I know I have a lot to learn about being a father. But I love that little girl with everything I have, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she's valued, protected, and cherished. And what about the racial dynamics? The judge asked bluntly. A white man raising a black child in today's America. Are you prepared for those challenges? I'm learning, Jonathan said honestly. I've been reading, talking to experts, trying to understand the unique challenges Sophia will face. I can't pretend to know what it's like to be a black woman in America, but I can make sure she's surrounded by people who do. I can make sure she knows her history, her culture, her worth. The judge made some notes, then looked at Sophia. Young lady, would you like to tell me what you think about all this? Sophia stood up with the dignity of someone much older than 9 years. Yes, Your Honor. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, and Jonathan felt his heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. Sophia, Judge Patterson said gently, do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, ma'am. People are trying to decide where I should live. And where do you want to live with Mr. Jonathan? The answer came without hesitation. Why? Sophia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because he sees me, not like a problem that needs fixing or a kid that needs watching. He sees me like I'm important, like I matter. She looked across the courtroom at Marcus Williams. My biological father left me when I was little. He chose drugs over me. Grammy Ruby took care of me until she died, and then I was alone until Mr. Jonathan found me. Her voice grew stronger. Mr. Jonathan didn't have to help me. He could have just given me money and walked away, but he didn't. He took me home. He bought me clothes and books and art supplies. He reads to me at night and helps me with homework and tells me I'm smart and beautiful and worthy of love. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. He's not my biological father, but he's my real daddy, and I don't want to live anywhere else. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes, caught up in the raw honesty of a 9-year-old girl fighting for her family. Judge Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces before her. The nervous biological father, the confident businessman, and the brave little girl who'd articulated her needs with stunning clarity. This court finds, she said finally, that the best interests of the child are served by granting temporary guardianship to Jonathan Mitchell, pending a full adoption hearing in 6 months. The gavel fell, and Sophia flew out of the witness stand, straight into Jonathan's arms. He caught her and held her tight, feeling like his heart might burst from relief and joy and overwhelming love. We did it, she whispered in his ear. We're really a family now. We were always a family, he whispered back. Now it's just official. But what Jonathan didn't know was that their legal victory was just the beginning. Because the 6 months between the guardianship hearing and the final adoption proceedings would bring challenges that would test not just their legal rights, but their very understanding of what it meant to be a family in America. The media attention, far from dying down, exploded into a cultural phenomenon. Their story became a lightning rod for debates about race adoption, foster care, and wealth inequality. Some saw them as an inspiring example of love transcending boundaries. Others saw them as a symbol of white privilege and the commodification of black children. But through it all, Jonathan and Sophia focused on the simple work of becoming a family. There were homework assignments to check and bedtime stories to read. There were art projects to admire and scraped knees to bandage. There were conversations about racism and identity, about dreams and fears, about what it meant to belong somewhere. And slowly, day by day, they built something that neither of them had ever had before. Not just a family, but a home. Not just love, but the security that comes from knowing that love will last. The adoption hearing, when it finally came in August, was almost anticlimactic after the drama of the guardianship proceeding. Marcus Williams had disappeared again, failing to appear for any of his scheduled visitation sessions or comply with the court's requirements for demonstrating parental fitness. Child Services had officially recommended the adoption, and even Director Hawkins seemed genuinely pleased with Sophia's progress. Judge Patterson, the same stern woman who'd granted the initial guardianship, smiled as she reviewed the final paperwork. "Miss Williams," she said to Sophia, "do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jonathan is officially becoming my daddy, and I'm officially becoming his daughter. And is that what you want? More than anything?" Judge Patterson turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Mitchell, do you solemnly swear to love, protect, and provide for Sophia Williams, as if she were your biological child, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby grant this petition for adoption. Congratulations, Mr. Mitchell." "Congratulations, Sophia Williams Mitchell." The gavel fell, and Sophia launched herself from her chair into Jonathan's arms. This time, there were no cameras, no media circus, no protesters or supporters. Just a father and daughter officially recognized by the state for what they'd known in their hearts for months. But their story was far from over, because what they'd built together, the love and trust and unshakable bond between them, would become the foundation for something much larger, something that would touch thousands of lives and change the way America thought about family adoption and the power of love to transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. They celebrated that night with dinner at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where they'd first met exactly 10 months earlier. Eric Rippert, the chef, had personally prepared a special menu for them, and the same table where Sophia had first asked for food was decorated with flowers and a small congratulations sign. "It's funny," Sophia said, looking around the elegant dining room. "This place used to seem so scary and fancy. Now it just feels like where our story started." "What do you think our story will be about?" Jonathan asked. Sophia considered this seriously, as she did most things. "I think it's about finding each other, and about how families aren't just the people you're born with. They're the people who choose to love you." Jonathan raised his glass of champagne. Sophia had sparkling cider. "To choosing each other. To choosing each other." Sophia agreed, clinking her glass against his. But what neither of them knew that night was that their story of choosing each other was about to inspire thousands of other people to make the same choice. Because love, when it's real and transformative and unshakable, has a way of multiplying beyond anything we can imagine. And their journey together was just beginning. The years that followed the adoption brought changes that neither Jonathan nor Sophia could have anticipated. What had started as a personal story of rescue and love gradually evolved into something much larger, a movement that would transform how America thought about foster care adoption and the power of families to heal trauma. It began with letters. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of them. Children in foster care who had heard their story and found hope in it. Prospective adoptive parents looking for guidance and encouragement. Social workers and advocates seeking resources and support. Each letter was answered personally, with Jonathan and Sophia insisting on reading every single one and responding thoughtfully. Some were heartbreaking testimonies of children who felt forgotten by the world. Others were joyful updates from families who had been inspired to adopt after hearing their story. But it was one particular letter that would change the trajectory of their lives forever. It came from a 10-year-old girl named Keisha Johnson, who wrote in careful purple ink, "Dear Mr. Mitchell, I saw you and Sophia on the news, and I just wanted to say thank you for showing people that kids like me deserve families too. Maybe someday someone will want to adopt me like you adopted Sophia." That letter led to a phone call, which led to a meeting, which led to Keisha becoming the second child to join the Mitchell family through adoption. But more importantly, it led to the establishment of the Sophia Foundation, an organization dedicated to improving outcomes for children in foster care. The foundation's mission was comprehensive, addressing not just individual adoptions, but systemic reform. They funded training programs for social workers, provided resources for adoptive families, and advocated for policy changes that would make the system more responsive to children's needs. But perhaps most importantly, they pioneered a new model of residential care for children waiting for adoption. Ruby's house, named after Sophia's grandmother, was different from traditional group homes in crucial ways. The staff-to-child ratio was nearly 1-to-1. Each child had their own bedroom decorated according to their preferences. There were common areas designed to feel like family spaces. A large kitchen where kids could cook with staff, a library with comfortable reading nooks, an art studio with natural light and professional supplies. Most importantly, the philosophy was different. Instead of managing behavior, the focus was on healing trauma. Instead of preparing kids for independence, the goal was preparing them for relationships with adoptive families, with mentors, with themselves. "Every child who comes here should feel like they matter," Sophia said during the opening ceremony, speaking to a crowd that included city officials, social workers, and families. "They should wake up every morning knowing that someone cares, whether they're happy or sad, whether they're learning or struggling, whether they feel safe or scared." The impact was immediate and measurable. Within 6 months, Ruby's house had achieved a 90% placement rate, far above the national average. More importantly, the placements were lasting. Kids who came through the program were successfully attaching to their adoptive families and thriving in their new homes. But Jonathan and Sophia weren't content to stop there. They lobbied for legislative changes to make adoption more accessible and affordable. They funded training programs for social workers and prospective parents. They created scholarship programs for foster youth pursuing higher education. And they kept writing back to kids like Keisha, who had now joined their family and was thriving in her new environment. As Sophia grew older, her role in the foundation evolved. She started a blog called Chosen, where she wrote about her experiences and answered questions from other kids in foster care. She spoke at conferences and schools, sharing her story and advocating for policy changes. On her 13th birthday, she was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on child welfare. Jonathan sat in the gallery watching his daughter speak with confidence and clarity about the need for reform. "Members of Congress," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I'm here, not just as someone who was once in foster care, but as someone who found a family through adoption. I want you to understand that the children in our system aren't statistics or problems to be managed. We're human beings with dreams and potential, and an incredible capacity to love and be loved." She paused, looking directly at the committee members. "The question isn't whether these children deserve families, they do. The question is whether we as a society are willing to do what it takes to make sure they get them. The testimony, along with supporting research and policy proposals from the Sophia Foundation, led to the passage of the Foster Care Innovation Act, which provided funding for new approaches to child welfare and streamlined adoption procedures. By Sophia's 14th birthday, the foundation had helped place over 500 children in permanent homes, opened 3 residential facilities, and influenced policy changes in 12 states. But perhaps more importantly, it had changed the national conversation about foster care and adoption. Stories of successful transracial adoptions began appearing regularly in mainstream media. Celebrities and public figures began speaking openly about their own experiences with foster care and adoption. The stigma that had once surrounded children in care began to shift, replaced by a growing understanding that these kids weren't damaged goods. They were resilient survivors who needed loving families. Do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't walked into that restaurant? Sophia asked Jonathan one evening as they worked together in their home office, preparing for a foundation board meeting. Jonathan looked up from his laptop, considering the question seriously. Every day, he said. But not with regret, with gratitude. Gratitude for whatever combination of circumstances and courage brought you through those doors, for the hunger that drove you to ask a stranger for help, for the instinct that told me to say yes when you asked to sit down. Sophia smiled, but her expression remained thoughtful. Sometimes I feel like we have a responsibility now, like we have to use our story to help other people. Only if you want to, Jonathan said. You don't owe the world anything just because you survived. But I want to. Not because I owe it, but because she struggled for the words. Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible. To feel like nobody cared whether I lived or died. And now I know what it feels like to be seen and loved and valued. She looked directly at him. Every kid deserves to know what that feels like. Jonathan felt his throat tighten with emotion and pride. This remarkable young woman sitting across from him. His daughter had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. She'd taken her trauma and turned it into triumph, not just for herself, but for thousands of other children who might never know her name, but would benefit from her courage. You're right, he said quietly. Every kid does deserve that. And we're going to keep fighting until they get it. But what Jonathan didn't know was that their fight was about to face its biggest test yet. Because as Sophia entered her teenage years, the challenges would become more complex, the questions more difficult, and the stakes higher than ever before. The first major crisis came during Sophia's sophomore year at Trinity School when she was 15. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Jonathan received a call from the principal that would forever change how he understood the delicate balance of protecting his daughter while allowing her to grow. Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice tight with concern. We need you to come in immediately. There's been an incident. Jonathan arrived at the school to find Sophia sitting in the principal's office, but not in the way he'd seen her there before during previous minor incidents. This time, she looked defeated, her shoulders slumped and her eyes red from crying. What happened? Jonathan asked, sitting beside her and instinctively reaching for her hand. Mrs. Rodriguez exchanged glances with the school counselor, Ms. Washington, before speaking. There was an altercation during lunch. Several students were discussing college admissions, and some comments were made about affirmative action and whether Sophia's achievements were truly her own. Jonathan felt his blood pressure spike. What kind of comments? The details aren't as important as Sophia's response. Ms. Washington interjected gently. She became very upset and accused her classmates of questioning her intelligence because of her race. She said some things that were hurtful, such as Sophia spoke for the first time since he'd arrived. I told Madison Parker that at least I earned my place here, instead of having my daddy buy it like she did. And I told Jeremy Chen that just because his parents were doctors didn't mean he was smart enough to be one too. Jonathan winced. Both comments had clearly been designed to hurt, and both had likely succeeded. I was angry. Sophia continued, tears starting to flow again. They were acting like I only got good grades because I'm black, like the teachers give me special treatment. Like everything I've worked for doesn't count because of affirmative action. And how did the other students respond? Jonathan asked Mrs. Rodriguez. Not well. Several parents have called demanding apologies. One has threatened to pull their child from the school if Sophia isn't disciplined. Jonathan felt the familiar protective rage rising in his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. This wasn't like previous situations where Sophia had been an innocent victim. This was messier, more complicated. What kind of discipline are we talking about? He asked. A 3-day suspension and mandatory counseling sessions about conflict resolution, Mrs. Rodriguez said, along with written apologies to the students she insulted. Jonathan looked at Sophia, who was staring at her hands. What do you think is fair? I think I should apologize for being mean, she said quietly. But I don't think I should apologize for being angry. What they said was wrong. You're right on both counts. Jonathan agreed. Being angry was justified. How you express that anger, that's something we can work on. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, Jonathan couldn't simply fix Sophia's problems with money or influence. This was about identity race, and the complex dynamics of being a black teenager in predominantly white spaces, experiences he could support her through, but couldn't fully understand. That evening, they had the most difficult conversation of their relationship. Do you ever wish you'd been adopted by a black family? Jonathan asked, as they sat in his study, the same room where they'd had so many important talks over the years. Sophia was quiet for a long time, curled up in her favorite chair with her knees drawn to her chest. Sometimes she said finally, not because I don't love you, but because it would be easier sometimes. Easier how I wouldn't have to explain why my dad is white. I wouldn't have to deal with people assuming I'm lucky to be rescued, or that I don't really belong in certain spaces. I wouldn't have to be the poster child for transracial adoption. Jonathan felt his heart clench. I'm sorry. I never wanted any of that pressure on you. I know you didn't. And most of the time I'm proud of our family and our story. But sometimes she struggled for the words. Sometimes I just want to be a regular teenager who doesn't have to represent anything or prove anything to anybody. You shouldn't have to, Jonathan said firmly. You're 15 years old. Your job is to figure out who you are, not to be a symbol for anyone else. But I am a symbol whether I want to be or not. Every time I succeed, people say it's because of you. Every time I struggle, people say it's because I don't really belong in your world. Jonathan was quiet, processing the weight of what she was telling him. What can I do to help? I don't know, Sophia admitted. Maybe I need to talk to someone who understands what it's like to be me. That conversation led to Dr. Sophia Williams, a black psychologist who specialized in identity development for transracially adopted teens. Dr. Williams became a crucial part of Sophia's support system, helping her navigate the complex terrain of belonging to two worlds while fully fitting into neither. Identity formation is challenging for all teenagers, Dr. Williams explained to Jonathan during one of their family sessions. But for transracially adopted teens, especially those in the public eye, the challenges are multiplied. Sophia is trying to figure out who she is while also managing public expectations about who she should be. How do I support her without overstepping? Jonathan asked. By listening, without trying to fix everything. By acknowledging the reality of her experiences, even when they're painful for you to hear. And by remembering that some of her struggles aren't problems to be solved, They're just part of growing up as a black woman in America. The work with Dr. Williams helped, but it didn't eliminate the challenges. If anything, as Sophia grew older and more articulate, she became more aware of the microaggressions and assumptions she faced daily. There was the college counselor, who automatically steered her toward diversity programs, rather than discussing her actual academic interests. There were the well-meaning adults who praised her for being articulate, as if it were surprising. There were the classmates who assumed she'd gotten into advanced classes because of her race, rather than her 4.0 GPA. Each incident required navigation, and Jonathan found himself learning as much as he was teaching. He read books about raising black children, attended workshops for transracial adoptive families, and connected with other parents navigating similar challenges. But perhaps the most important lesson came from Sophia herself during a conversation about college applications in her junior year. "I've been thinking about my essay topic," she said one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, Jonathan preparing dinner while Sophia did homework at the island. "What are you considering?" "I want to write about being adopted, but not the way people expect." Jonathan paused in his chopping. "What do you mean? Everyone assumes I'll write about being rescued or overcoming adversity or how grateful I am. And I am grateful, don't get me wrong. But that's not the most important part of my story." What is Sophia set down her pencil and looked at him directly. "The most important part is that you didn't try to save me from being black. You didn't try to make me white or colorblind or any of that. You helped me figure out how to be both your daughter and a black woman. You taught me that I could love you completely while still being proud of where I came from." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "A lot of white parents who adopt black kids think love is enough. But you understood that love had to include learning about my culture, my history, the challenges I'd face. You didn't just love me despite my blackness. You loved all of me, including my blackness." Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes. "You taught me that," he said quietly. "You taught me that loving you meant seeing all of you. That's what I want to write about." Sophia continued, "Not about being saved, but about being seen. About what it means to build a family that honors difference instead of ignoring it." The essay she ultimately wrote was powerful and nuanced, earning her acceptance to her first-choice colleges. But more importantly, it represented a maturity and self-awareness that filled Jonathan with profound pride. As Sophia's senior year progressed, their roles began to shift. She was no longer the frightened child who needed protection from the world's cruelties. She was becoming a young woman capable of protecting herself and others, someone who understood her own power and was learning how to use it responsibly. This evolution was perhaps most evident in her work with the foundation. What had started as a child's desire to help other kids had grown into sophisticated advocacy and program development. Sophia had spent summers interning with policy organizations, studying successful foster care reforms in other countries, and developing innovative approaches to supporting aged-out youth. "I want to expand our scholarship program," she announced during a foundation board meeting in the spring of her senior year. But not just financial scholarships, mentorship programs that pair successful adults who were in foster care with current college students. "That's a significant undertaking," noted Elizabeth Harper, who remained the foundation's legal advisor. "The logistics alone would be complex." "Everything worthwhile is complex," Sophia replied with a smile that reminded Jonathan of the determined 9-year-old who'd asked for food in a 5-star restaurant. "But I've been researching similar programs, and I think we can make it work." She presented a detailed proposal, complete with budget projections, partnership strategies, and measurable outcomes. The board approved it unanimously, and the program launched 6 months later to national acclaim. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the evolution of Sophia's relationship with her biological heritage. During her senior year, She decided to research her family history beyond Grammy Ruby, tracing her lineage back through generations of strong women who had survived slavery, Jim Crow, and countless other challenges. I found her, Sophia announced one evening, bursting into Jonathan's study with her laptop. I found Grammy Ruby's mother, my great-grandmother. Jonathan looked at the screen, which showed a digitized photograph of a young black woman in 1940s, clothing, standing proudly in front of a small house. Her name was Lillian Williams. Sophia continued excitedly. She was a seamstress and a civil rights activist. She organized voter registration drives in Alabama in the 1950s. And look, she scrolled to another photo. She had 6 children and put 3 of them through college during segregation. She sounds remarkable, Jonathan said, studying the photo. The woman's eyes held the same determined intelligence he saw in Sophia every day. I want to name the new program after her, Sophia said. The Lillian Williams Scholars Program, Grammy. Ruby always said I should know where I came from, and now I do. I come from women who fought for the right to be seen as fully human. Jonathan felt a deep sense of completion in that moment. The scared little girl who'd lost everything was now a young woman who understood her place in a continuum of strength and resistance. She hadn't just survived her circumstances, she'd transformed them into power. Grammy Ruby would be so proud, he said softly. You think so, I know so. And I'm proud too, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become. As graduation approached, Jonathan found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't expected. For 8 years, he'd been Sophia's primary source of support and guidance. Soon, she'd be leaving for Harvard, ready to begin her own journey toward medical school and the pediatric career she'd dreamed of since childhood. Are you going to be okay when I leave? Sophia asked one evening as they walked through Central Park, a tradition they'd maintained since her early childhood. Are you worried about me? A little. You arranged your whole life around taking care of me. What happens when I don't need taking care of anymore? Jonathan smiled at the question, recognizing the compassion that had always been at the core of who Sophia was. First of all, you'll always be my daughter, which means I'll never stop wanting to take care of you, even when you don't need it. Second, I think I'll be just fine. Really, really. You taught me how to love someone more than myself. That's a skill I can use in lots of ways. Like what? Well, there's the foundation which will keep growing whether you're here or not. There are the thousands of kids whose lives we've touched. And maybe he paused, considering whether to share the thought that had been growing in his mind. Maybe there's room in my life for someone else who needs a family. Sophia stopped walking and stared at him. You're thinking about adopting again? I'm thinking about it. Not right away, and not to replace you. Nobody could ever do that. But you've shown me what it means to be a father. Maybe there's another child out there who could benefit from what I've learned. Sophia threw her arms around him in the middle of the park, not caring who saw them. That would be amazing, she said into his chest. Some kid is going to be so lucky. Not as lucky as I was, Jonathan replied, holding his daughter tight. Not as lucky as I was. Harvard Yard in September was everything Sophia had imagined, and nothing like she'd expected. The brick buildings and ivy-covered walls spoke of tradition and privilege, while the diverse faces of her classmates hinted at the changing nature of American higher education. As Jonathan helped her move into Weld Hall, she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that had accompanied every major transition in her life. You sure you have everything? Jonathan asked, surveying the boxes and suitcases that had transformed the small dorm room into something resembling home. Dad, you've asked me that 6 times in the last hour. Sophia laughed, but there was affection in her voice. The word Dad had replaced Mr. Jonathan gradually over the years, and Jonathan still felt a small thrill every time he heard it. I know. I'm being ridiculous. You're being a father. There's a difference. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. A young woman with kind eyes and an infectious smile peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm Emma, your roommate. My parents are still trying to figure out how to work the elevator, so I thought I'd introduce myself." Emma Chen was from California, the daughter of a software engineer and a high school principal. She was pre-med like Sophia, with plans to specialize in pediatric oncology. Within hours, the two young women had bonded over their shared academic intensity and their mutual bewilderment at having classmates who treated Harvard like a four-year party. "I think I'm going to like it here," Sophia told Jonathan as they said goodbye that evening. "I think you are too. But remember, I know Dad. Call if I need anything. Text every few days so you know I'm alive. Don't let anyone make me feel like I don't belong here." Jonathan smiled. "You've been listening for 8 years. I think I've got it down." The first semester was an adjustment. Harvard's academic rigor was exactly what Sophia had expected, but the social dynamics were more complex than she'd anticipated. She found herself navigating familiar territory, being one of the few black students in most of her classes, dealing with assumptions about how she'd gotten there, managing the expectations that came with being Sophia Williams Mitchell of the Sophia Foundation. "Do people here know about your adoption?" Emma asked one evening as they studied together in their room. "Some do. I try not to lead with it, but it's not exactly a secret." "Why?" "Just curious. I heard some girls in our section talking about you, about how you're some kind of celebrity." Sophia sighed. "That's what I was afraid of. I just want to be a regular student." "Are you kidding me?" Emma sat up from her biology textbook. "You've helped thousands of kids find families. You've changed laws. You've built an empire of compassion. Why would you want to hide that?" "Because I want people to know me for who I am, not what I represent." "But what you represent is part of who you are," Emma pointed out. "You can't separate Sophia, the person, from Sophia, the advocate. They're the same person." It was a conversation that echoed many others Sophia would have throughout her college years, as she learned to integrate all the different aspects of her identity. She was a Harvard student and a foster care survivor, a foundation board member, and a pre-med student, Jonathan Mitchell's daughter and Grammy Ruby's granddaughter. The integration wasn't always smooth. During her sophomore year, she faced criticism from some black student organizations for being too closely associated with white philanthropic circles. At the same time, some of her classmates questioned whether her advocacy work was just an extension of her privileged upbringing. "You can't win," she complained to Jonathan during one of their weekly phone calls. "If I talk about foster care, I'm playing the victim card. If I don't, I'm forgetting where I came from. If I mention the foundation, I'm name-dropping. If I don't, I'm being fake humble." "Welcome to being a public figure," Jonathan said wryly. "People will always have opinions about how you should use your voice. The question is, what do you think is right? I think I should use whatever platform I have to help other people. But I also think I should be allowed to just be a college student sometimes. So be both." How? The same way you've always done hard things one day at a time, with intention and integrity. But what Sophia didn't know was that her biggest challenge at Harvard was still coming. And it would come from a place she'd never expected from someone who should have been an ally, but would instead become her greatest test. Sophia's junior year brought clarity in unexpected ways. She was taking a course called Social Policy and Child Welfare, when the professor assigned a case study that hit uncomfortably close to home, analyzing the outcomes of high-profile adoption cases and their impact on foster care policy. Miss Mitchell, Professor Sarah Hendricks said, after class one day, "I'd like to speak with you about the final project." Sophia approached the professor's desk with some trepidation. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the opposite. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in doing an independent study instead of the standard final project." I'd like you to conduct a longitudinal analysis of the Sophia Foundation's impact on adoption rates and outcomes. You want me to study my own foundation. I want you to bring academic rigor to work that's been primarily driven by passion and good intentions. Don't get me wrong, passion and good intentions are crucial, but data and analysis can help you understand what's working, what isn't, and how to scale successful interventions. The project became Sophia's junior thesis and eventually her senior honors project. Working with research assistants and statisticians, she analyzed 8 years of foundation data, conducted interviews with hundreds of families, and compared outcomes across different programs and regions. The results were both encouraging and sobering. The Foundation's programs had indeed led to measurable improvements in adoption rates, family stability, and educational outcomes for former foster children. But the data also revealed persistent racial disparities in placement rates and highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by older children and those with complex trauma histories. "We're making a difference," Sophia told the Foundation Board during her presentation of the findings, "but we're not making enough of a difference for all kids equally." The research led to major programmatic changes, including targeted recruitment of Black and Latino adoptive families, enhanced trauma-informed care training, and specialized programs for teens aging out of care. But perhaps more importantly, the project marked Sophia's evolution from passionate advocate to sophisticated policy analyst. She began to see her foundation work not just as a mission of the heart, but as a complex social intervention that required constant evaluation and improvement. This analytical approach served her well when she encountered the biggest challenge of her college years during the spring of her junior year. She was studying in Widener Library when her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Chen. "Need to talk ASAP. Call me." Sophia stepped outside and dialed Margaret's number. "What's wrong?" "There's been an article published in the Washington Post," Margaret said without preamble. "It's not good." The article, titled "The Sophia Industrial Complex: When Good Intentions Become Big Business," questioned the Foundation's effectiveness and suggested that the Mitchell family had profited from their adoption story through book deals, speaking fees, and media appearances. The Foundation has paid out over $2 million in consulting fees to organizations connected to the Mitchell family, the reporter had written. While the work may be well-intentioned, critics question whether this represents sound financial stewardship or a form of vanity philanthropy. Sophia felt sick as she read the article on her laptop. The reporter had twisted facts, taken quotes out of context, and made insinuations without providing evidence. But the damage was real. The comments section was filled with people questioning the Foundation's legitimacy and the authenticity of Sophia's story. "Dad," she said, when she called Jonathan, "have you seen the article? I'm reading it now." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "It's a hit piece, poorly researched and full of innuendo. But what if people believe it? What if this hurts the Foundation? Then we'll deal with it. We'll release our financial records, invite auditors, and prove that every penny has been spent appropriately. But what about my reputation? What about Harvard? What if—" "Sophia." Jonathan's voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. "Take a breath. This isn't the first time someone has questioned our motives, and it won't be the last. We know the truth. The families we've helped know the truth. The children who now have homes know the truth. But what if the truth isn't enough? Then we keep doing the work anyway, because the work matters more than what people say about the work." The crisis passed as most crises do. The Foundation's board launched an independent audit that confirmed the appropriate use of funds. Several major newspapers published corrections to the Post article's most egregious errors. Most importantly, the families served by the Foundation rallied to its defense, sharing their stories and pushing back against the negative narrative. But the experience taught Sophia valuable lessons about public life and the price of advocacy. She learned that success makes you a target, that good work doesn't immunize you against criticism, and that building something meaningful requires a thick skin and a clear conscience. The article was actually a gift, she told Emma one evening, as they walked along the Charles River. It forced me to really examine what we're doing and why. And you know what I realized? What I'm not doing this work because I want people to think I'm good. I'm doing it because I remember what it felt like to be invisible, and I never want another child to feel that way. As her senior year began, Sophia faced decisions about her future that would have been unimaginable to the 9-year-old who'd asked for food in a restaurant. She'd been accepted to Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, and UCSF. She'd been offered a Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford. The foundation board wanted her to take a gap year and consider a larger role in the organization's leadership. "What do you want to do?" Jonathan asked during one of their walks through Central Park during her winter break. "I want to be a doctor," Sophia said without hesitation. "I've wanted that since I was little, and nothing's changed that dream. But I also feel responsible for the foundation. It's grown so much, helped so many people. Can I just walk away from that?" Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sweetheart, you've given the foundation 8 years of your life. You've helped build something that will continue to help children long after you're gone. You don't owe it your entire future. But what if I could do more? What if taking a few years off medicine could help thousands more kids? And what if becoming a doctor helps you understand child welfare in ways that eventually make you even more effective as an advocate?" It was a question that would take months to answer. In the meantime, Sophia threw herself into her senior thesis, a comprehensive policy analysis titled Trauma-Informed Care in Foster Care Settings, a Framework for Systemic Reform. The thesis caught the attention of policymakers in Washington, leading to an invitation to testify before Congress again, this time not as a former foster child sharing her story, but as a Harvard senior presenting rigorous research on foster care reform. 8 years ago, she began her testimony. "I stood before a similar committee as a 13-year-old asking you to see foster children as human beings with potential. Today, I stand before you as a Harvard senior with data showing that when we invest in that potential, everyone benefits." She presented her research with the confidence of someone who'd spent years mastering both the emotional and analytical aspects of child welfare. The room was silent as she outlined specific policy recommendations, budget projections, and implementation timelines. The question, she concluded, is not whether we can afford to reform our foster care system. The question is whether we can afford not to. The testimony led to meetings with senators, policy briefings at the White House, and invitations to join high-level working groups on child welfare reform. Suddenly, Sophia found herself not just advocating for change, but helping to craft the legislation that would make change possible. "You realize what's happening, don't you?" Elizabeth Harper said during one of their strategy sessions in Washington. "You're becoming one of the most influential voices on child welfare policy in the country, and you're still an undergraduate." "It's kind of terrifying," Sophia admitted. "It should be. Power is terrifying when you understand its weight." As graduation approached, Sophia made her decision. She would defer medical school for 2 years and accept a fellowship with the Brookings Institution to continue her policy work. It wasn't a permanent departure from medicine, just a detour that might ultimately make her a better doctor and a more effective advocate. "Are you sure?" Jonathan asked when she told him. "I'm sure. Medicine will always be there. But right now there's momentum for real change in foster care policy, and I want to be part of making that happen. Grammy Ruby wanted you to be a doctor. Grammy Ruby wanted me to help children feel better. There are lots of ways to do that." On graduation day, as Sophia walked across the stage in Harvard Yard to receive her diploma, Jonathan felt a pride so profound it was almost painful. The scared little girl who'd asked for food had become a confident young woman, ready to change the world. She'd kept the best parts of who she'd always been: the compassion, the intelligence, the determination, while adding layers of sophistication, analytical rigor, and strategic thinking. But perhaps most remarkably, she'd never lost sight of her core mission, making sure no child ever felt invisible again. As they celebrated that evening with dinner at Le Bernardin, a tradition they'd maintained every year since her adoption, Jonathan raised a toast. To Sophia Williams Mitchell, he said, Harvard graduate policy analyst foundation leader and the best daughter a father could ask for. To family, Sophia replied, raising her own glass chosen with intention and held together by love. The restaurant staff, who'd watched this unlikely family grow and thrive over the years, applauded spontaneously. In the same dining room, where a hungry child had once asked for food, a young woman celebrated her graduation from one of the world's most prestigious universities. It was a moment that perfectly captured the distance they'd traveled together and the love that had made the journey possible. But what neither of them knew that night was that their most important work was still ahead of them, because the next chapter of their story would take them from personal triumph to global impact, from changing individual lives to transforming entire systems. And it would all begin with a phone call from someone Sophia had never expected to hear from again. 2 years at the Brookings Institution transformed Sophia from a passionate advocate into a sophisticated policy architect. She'd co-authored 3 major reports on foster care reform, testified before Congress 6 times, and helped draft legislation that was now working its way through both chambers. Her work had attracted international attention, leading to consultations with child welfare officials in the UK, Canada, and Australia. But it was a phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning in October that would bring her full circle to her original calling. Dr. Martinez Sophia said, answering her phone while reviewing budget projections in her DC office. Ms. Mitchell, this is Dr. Patricia Martinez at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I'm calling about your medical school application. Sophia's heart skipped. She'd reapplied to several medical schools for the following fall, but hadn't expected to hear back so early in the process. We'd like to offer you early admission to our MD-PhD program. Dr. Martinez continued, your policy work has caught the attention of our faculty, and we think you'd be perfect for our new track in pediatric health policy. That's incredible. Thank you. There's one condition. We'd like you to consider developing your dissertation research around trauma-informed pediatric care. Specifically, we're interested in your proposal for integrating medical and social services for children in foster care. Sophia felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. This wasn't just medical school. This was an opportunity to combine her policy expertise with clinical training to become the kind of doctor who understood systems as well as symptoms. When do you need an answer? Take your time. This is a significant commitment, 8 years total with your policy fellowship counting toward the PhD component. But we think you could revolutionize how we think about child welfare and pediatric medicine. That evening, Sophia called Jonathan from her apartment near DuPont Circle. They want me to become the kind of doctor who fixes systems, not just patients, she explained after walking him through the offer. That sounds like the perfect job for you, Jonathan said. What's the hesitation? It's 8 more years of school. I'll be 31 when I finish. That's a long time to be in training, and you'll be 31 whether you're a doctor or not. The question is, what kind of 31-year-old you want to be? Sophia laughed. That's exactly what Grammy Ruby used to say. She said life was long enough to be several different people if you kept learning and growing. Smart woman. What does your gut tell you that this is what I'm supposed to do? That all the policy work was preparation for this, not a departure from medicine? Then you have your answer. 3 months later, Sophia was back in school, this time as a first-year medical student at one of the country's most prestigious children's hospitals. But she wasn't starting from scratch. Her policy background and foundation experience gave her a unique perspective that her professors quickly recognized. "Tell me about trauma-informed care," Dr. Sarah Kim asked during Sophia's first pediatrics rotation. "It's an approach that recognizes how childhood trauma affects brain development, learning, and behavior," Sophia replied. "Instead of asking what's wrong with this child, trauma-informed care asks what happened to this child, and how does that change treatment? It shifts the focus from managing symptoms to addressing root causes. It recognizes that many behavioral and even physical health problems stem from adverse childhood experiences." Dr. Kim nodded approvingly. "I understand you've worked extensively with foster children. What have you observed about their healthcare needs?" "They have significantly higher rates of developmental delays, mental health issues, and chronic medical conditions compared to other children. But they also move between providers, frequently have inconsistent insurance coverage, and often lack adults who can provide accurate medical histories. What would you change about how we serve these children?" Sophia paused, organizing her thoughts. This was the question she'd been preparing to answer her entire adult life. "I'd create integrated care teams that include pediatricians, mental health professionals, and social workers. I'd establish medical homes that follow children through placement changes. I'd train all pediatric providers in trauma-informed care and require child welfare agencies to prioritize medical continuity." That sounds expensive. It is. But it's much less expensive than the long-term costs of untreated trauma, special education services, juvenile justice involvement, adult mental health, and substance abuse treatment. Dr. Kim smiled. "You've thought about this for most of my life." As Sophia progressed through medical school, she began developing the research that would form the basis of her dissertation. Working with faculty mentors and policy experts, she designed a study to evaluate integrated care models for foster children in 3 major cities. The research was ambitious and complex, requiring partnerships with hospitals, child welfare agencies, and foster families. But Sophia's unique background as both a former foster child and a policy expert opened doors that might have remained closed to other researchers. "You speak their language," observed Dr. Michael Torres, her faculty advisor, after watching Sophia present the study design to a group of skeptical social workers. "They trust you in a way they wouldn't trust most medical researchers." "I've been where their kids are," Sophia replied simply. That matters. But what Sophia didn't anticipate was how her research would lead to a discovery that would shake the foundation world and force her to confront the most difficult questions about her own success. The study results, published 3 years later in the New England Journal of Medicine, were groundbreaking. Children who received integrated care showed significant improvements in physical health, mental health, and educational outcomes compared to those receiving traditional fragmented services. More importantly, the integrated care model proved cost-effective, with every dollar invested saving an estimated $3 in long-term healthcare and social service costs. "This is the kind of research that changes policy," Dr. Torres told Sophia as they reviewed the publication. "You've provided the evidence base for transforming how we serve vulnerable children." But for Sophia, the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. She was working in the pediatric emergency department during her 4th year when a 7-year-old boy named Marcus came in with his foster mother. Marcus had been removed from his home 3 months earlier and was struggling with nightmares, anxiety, and aggressive behavior. His foster mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, was at her wits' end. "He's been through 4 placements already," Mrs. Rodriguez explained to Sophia. "The previous families said he was too difficult. I don't want to give up on him, but I don't know how to help him." Sophia knelt down to Marcus's eye level seeing her younger self in his wary eyes and defensive posture. "Hi, Marcus. I'm Dr. Sophia. Can you tell me what's been making you feel scared?" For the next hour, Sophia worked with Marcus, Mrs. Rodriguez, and the integrated care team to develop a comprehensive treatment plan. They addressed his medical needs, connected him with a trauma-informed therapist, and provided Mrs. Rodriguez with resources and support. 6 months later, Mrs. Rodriguez sent Sophia a photo of Marcus at his adoption ceremony, smiling broadly as he held a certificate making his placement permanent. "He's a different child," Mrs. Rodriguez wrote. "Still healing, but happy and secure. Thank you for seeing him the way you did." That photo hung in Sophia's office throughout the rest of medical school and her pediatric residency, a reminder of why she'd chosen this path. Her residency at Boston Children's Hospital was demanding but fulfilling. She specialized in pediatric emergency medicine while continuing her research on trauma-informed care. Her colleagues knew her story, but they respected her more for her clinical skills and research contributions than for her celebrity status. "You're one of the best residents I've worked with." Dr. Elizabeth Chang, the emergency department director, told Sophia during her final evaluation, "You have exceptional clinical judgment and a rare ability to connect with difficult children. What makes you say that watch yourself work with a scared, aggressive child compared to other residents? You never take their behavior personally. You see past the symptoms to the underlying pain. That's not something you can teach. It's something you have to have lived." As Sophia's training neared completion, she faced another major decision about her future. She'd been offered positions at several prestigious children's hospitals, a faculty appointment at Harvard Medical School, and even a role as chief medical officer for a major child welfare organization. But it was a conversation with Jonathan during her final year of residency that helped clarify her path. "I've been thinking about the foundation," she said during one of their walks through Boston Common. "It's been 12 years since we started it, and I've been away from day-to-day operations for almost 6 years now." "It's been thriving without you," Jonathan pointed out. "The board and staff have done incredible work." "I know, but I wonder if it's time for me to come back, but in a different role. Not as the poster child or the inspirational speaker, but as someone who can bridge the gap between medical care and child welfare." What would that look like? A new initiative focused on improving health care for children in care. Research policy advocacy program development, using everything I've learned in medical school and residency to make systemic changes. Jonathan smiled. "You want to become the change you wish you'd seen when you were in the system." "Exactly. Then that's what you should do." The Sophia Foundation's healthcare initiative launched 18 months later with Dr. Sophia Williams Mitchell as its director. The program focused on 3 main areas: training healthcare providers in trauma-informed care, advocating for policy changes to improve medical continuity for foster children, and developing innovative care models for vulnerable populations. The work was challenging and complex, requiring collaboration across multiple systems and stakeholders. But Sophia's unique combination of lived experience, clinical training, and policy expertise made her uniquely qualified to lead the effort. 5 years after launching the initiative, Sophia was invited to present her work at the World Health Organization's Conference on Child Health and Welfare in Geneva. Standing before an international audience of policymakers, clinicians, and advocates, she felt the weight of how far she'd traveled from that scared 9-year-old in a restaurant. Trauma-informed care isn't just a clinical approach, she told the assembly. It's a recognition of children's fundamental humanity and resilience. When we ask what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you, we open the door to healing. In the audience, Jonathan watched his daughter command the attention of world leaders and policy experts, speaking with authority about solutions to problems he'd never imagined when he first brought her home. After her presentation, Sophia was approached by delegates from dozens of countries interested in implementing similar programs. But the conversation that meant the most came from a young woman about her own age. "Dr. Mitchell," the woman said, approaching Sophia after the session. "My name is Amara Hassan. I'm a social worker from Somalia, and I wanted to thank you. Thank you for what? For showing the world that children like us, children who've experienced trauma and loss, can not only survive, but thrive. Your story gave me hope when I was struggling through university. Your work has given me a framework for helping children in my own country." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. "What's your story?" "I was orphaned during the Civil War and spent years in refugee camps. I made it to the U.S. as a teenager and was placed with a foster family in Minnesota. They were kind, but they didn't understand trauma the way your father understood yours. And now I'm working to develop trauma-informed care programs for refugee children. I'm using your research and your foundation's models as a starting point." As Sophia listened to Amara's story, she realized that the ripple effects of her work extended far beyond what she'd ever imagined. The scared little girl who'd asked for food had become a catalyst for systemic change that was now spreading across continents. That evening, as she walked along Lake Geneva with Jonathan, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't said yes that night?" she asked. "Every day," Jonathan replied, "but not with regret, with gratitude." Gratitude for what? For the hunger that drove you into that restaurant, for the courage that made you ask a stranger for help, for the instinct that told me you were exactly what I'd been missing without knowing it. And now I'm grateful for the woman you've become and the work you're doing. You've taken everything painful from your past and transformed it into healing for others." Sophia linked her arm through his as they walked. "We did that together." "Yes," Jonathan agreed. "We did." But what Jonathan didn't know was that their most important chapter was still to come. Because at 34, Dr. Sophia Williams Mitchell was about to embark on the greatest adventure of her life, one that would take their family full circle and prove that love, when it's real and transformative, has the power to echo through generations. The auditorium at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens in adjacent rooms. Dr. Sophia Williams Mitchell, now 34, and recognized as one of the world's leading experts on trauma-informed pediatric care, was delivering the keynote address at the International Conference on Child Welfare Innovation. But today's speech was different from the hundreds of others she'd given over the years. Today, she was announcing her retirement from active speaking and her transition to a new role that would take her story full circle. 25 years ago, she began her voice carrying the same clarity and confidence that had characterized her testimony before Congress as a child. A desperate 9-year-old girl walked into a restaurant and asked a stranger for food. That encounter changed 2 lives and ultimately touched thousands more. In the front row, Jonathan Mitchell, now 67, silver-haired and still distinguished, watched his daughter with the same mixture of pride and wonder he'd felt since the day they'd met. Beside him sat his wife of 3 years, Dr. Elena Santos, a pediatric psychiatrist he'd met through the Foundation's work. Elena had brought her own wisdom about trauma and healing to their family, and her presence had added new depth to Jonathan's understanding of love and partnership. But tonight, Sophia continued, "I want to talk not about the past, but about the future, about the next generation of leaders who will continue this work, and about my own next chapter." She paused, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach, where new life was growing, a secret she'd shared only with Jonathan and Elena so far. "In 6 months, I'll be stepping back from my speaking commitments to focus on a new role, becoming a mother." The auditorium erupted in applause, but Sophia raised her hand to continue. My husband David and I are expecting our first child, and we've decided to expand our family through both birth and adoption. We're in the process of adopting 2 siblings, Marcus, age 8, and Lily, age 6, who've been waiting for a family for 3 years. She smiled, thinking of the 2 children who would soon call her mom, and of David Chen, Emma's younger brother, whom she'd met during her Harvard reunion, a pediatric surgeon who shared her passion for helping vulnerable children. Some people might ask why, when I could have biological children, I'd choose to adopt as well. The answer is simple, because every child deserves a family, and love multiplies rather than divides. In the audience, tears flowed freely. Social workers, policymakers, advocates, and families whose lives had been touched by the Sophia Foundation's work were witnessing not just a career transition, but the continuation of a legacy. The foundation will continue its work under new leadership. Sophia continued. Dr. Keisha Johnson. Some of you may remember her as the little girl who wrote me a letter 23 years ago, will be taking over as executive director. More applause as Dr. Johnson, now a successful child psychologist and adoptive mother herself, stood to acknowledge the recognition. But I'm not disappearing, Sophia said with a smile. I'm simply changing roles. From advocate to mother, from public speaker to parent, from someone who talks about families to someone who's busy building one. After the speech, there was a reception where colleagues, friends, and families came to congratulate Sophia and share their own stories. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Mitchell. A young voice called out as the crowd was thinning. Sophia turned to see a girl of about 12, accompanied by an older black woman who looked remarkably familiar. Yes. My name is Ruby Thompson. I was named after my great-great-grandmother, Ruby Williams. Sophia's breath caught. Grammy. Ruby's family. The older woman stepped forward. I'm Dorothy Williams, Ruby's great-niece. I've been following your story for years, wanting to connect, but not sure it was appropriate. Oh my goodness, Sophia whispered, tears immediately springing to her eyes. Your family. We are indeed, and we wanted you to know how proud Aunt Ruby would be of everything you've accomplished. They talked for an hour, filling in gaps in family history and sharing stories about the remarkable woman who had shaped Sophia's early years. Dorothy revealed that she had several family photos and documents that Ruby had wanted Sophia to have someday. She used to say, "You were destined for great things," Dorothy said. But I don't think even she could have imagined all of this. She planted the seeds, Sophia replied. She taught me that intelligence was a gift to be shared, that strength came from helping others, and that family was about love, not just blood. Young Ruby Thompson looked up at Sophia with wide, curious eyes. Are you really famous? Sophia knelt down to the girl's level, seeing something of her younger self in the child's face. I'm really lucky. I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's the most important thing, having someone who sees your potential even when you can't see it yourself. My mama says, you help kids find families. I try to. Do you know any kids who need families? Ruby nodded solemnly. My friend at school. His mama died and he lives with his grandma, but she's sick a lot. Well, maybe you could help him know that there are people who care about kids like him, and that sometimes families can be found in unexpected places. As the reception wound down, Jonathan approached Sophia Elena at his side. Ready to go home? He asked. More than ready. They walked out of Columbia together, 3 generations of a chosen family that had grown through intention and love. In the car ride back to Manhattan, they talked about the future, about Marcus and Lily, who would be moving in next month, about the baby coming in the spring, about the foundation's next phase, about the ordinary miracles of daily family life. "Do you think Grammy Ruby would approve of all this?" Sophia asked, as they crossed the bridge into Manhattan. "I think Grammy Ruby is probably planning the baby shower from wherever she is," Elena said with a laugh, "and making sure Marcus and Lily know they're part of a long line of strong, resilient people." The penthouse had changed over the years, evolving from Jonathan's bachelor pad into a true family home. Sophia's childhood artwork still hung in the hallway, now joined by photos from graduations, awards ceremonies, and quiet family moments. The guest room where she'd first slept had been converted into an office, while 2 new bedrooms had been prepared for Marcus and Lily. That night, as had become their tradition during Sophia's visits, she and Jonathan sat on the balcony overlooking Central Park, sharing tea and reflecting on the day. "Any regrets?" Jonathan asked, a question that had become ritual between them. "Only that it took me so long to realize I wanted to be a mother," Sophia replied. "What about you?" "Only that I waited so long to marry Elena." Love gets better with practice, it turns out. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them. In the distance, they could see Le Bernardin, the restaurant where their story had begun a quarter-century earlier. "I've been thinking about that night," Sophia said. "About what would have happened if you'd said no. I've told you before I couldn't have said no. You wouldn't have let me." "What do you mean?" Jonathan smiled, remembering the fierce determination in a 9-year-old's eyes. "You didn't just ask for food that night. You asked for hope. And once you'd asked the question, the only moral answer was yes. Is that why you think other people got involved? All the families who adopted after hearing our story, all the policy changes, all the programs. I think you asked a question that night that echoed through time. What happens when we choose to see each other as fully human?" Every good thing that followed was just different ways of answering that question. Sophia leaned back in her chair, one hand resting on her growing belly. "What questions do you think Marcus and Lily will ask? Probably the same ones you did. Whether they're safe, whether they're loved, whether they have a place in the world. And what will we tell them? The same thing I told you. Yes, you're safe. Yes, you're loved. And yes, you not only have a place in the world, you have the power to make the world better." 5 years later, the backyard of the Mitchell-Chen family home in Westchester was alive with the chaos of a 7th birthday party. Marcus, now 13 and tall for his age, was helping his younger sister Lily, 11, organize a treasure hunt for the birthday girl, little Sarah Mitchell-Chen, who had inherited her mother's curiosity and her father's gentle nature. "Mom." Sarah called out, her voice carrying the particular urgency that only 7-year-olds could manage. "Marcus says I can't have 2 pieces of cake, but it's my birthday." Dr. Sophia Williams, Mitchell looked up from the picnic table where she was chatting with other parents, her smile encompassing the beautiful complexity of her family. At 39, she had found the balance she'd been seeking, continuing her work on a consulting basis while being fully present for the daily miracles of motherhood. "Marcus is right about the cake rule," she called back, "but it's your birthday, so you get to negotiate. What's your counteroffer? 1 piece now and 1 piece after dinner." "Deal." Jonathan, now 72, but still energetic, was pushing 3-year-old Ruby Thompson Mitchell on the swing set. Ruby had joined their family 2 years earlier, another child who'd needed a home, and found one with this ever-expanding group of people who understood that love multiplied rather than divided. "Higher, Grandpa John." Ruby giggled, her dark curls flying in the wind. "Any higher, and you'll be in orbit." Jonathan laughed, but obliged with another push. David Chen Mitchell was manning the grill, discussing pediatric surgery techniques with another parent, while simultaneously making sure no one's hot dog was overcooked. Elena sat nearby, keeping one eye on the children and another on the baby monitor for 6-month-old Michael, who was napping inside. It's controlled chaos, observed Dr. Keisha Johnson, who had driven up from the city with her own family to attend Sarah's party. As the new executive director of the Sophia Foundation, she'd taken the organization to new heights while maintaining its core mission of supporting vulnerable children. The best kind, Sophia replied, watching her children play with a contentment that would have been unimaginable to her 9-year-old self. As the afternoon wound down and families began to leave, Sophia found herself cleaning up with Marcus and Lily, a routine that had become one of her favorite parts of family gatherings. Mom, Lily said as she collected paper plates, "My friend Jessica at school says we're famous." "Is that true?" Sophia paused in her wiping of the picnic table. The children knew the basics of her story, that she'd been adopted by Jonathan, that they'd started a foundation to help other children, that sometimes people recognized them. But she'd tried to give them as normal a childhood as possible. "What do you think famous means?" she asked. "That people know who you are, even if you don't know them." "Then yes, I suppose we are a little bit. Does that bother you?" Marcus looked up from bagging trash. "Sometimes kids at school ask me if it's weird having a famous mom. I tell them it's not weird, you're just mom. You make us do chores and eat vegetables and practice piano, just like other moms. But also," Lily added thoughtfully, "you help kids who don't have families find families." "That's pretty cool. What about you, Marcus? How do you feel about the family business?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness that had characterized him since the day they'd met. At 8, he'd been angry and defensive, having learned not to trust that good things would last. 5 years later, he was thoughtful and kind, secure in his place in the family, but still carrying the wisdom that came from early adversity. "I think I want to help kids too when I grow up," he said finally. "But maybe not the same way you do. Maybe I want to be a teacher, so kids who feel stupid or different know that someone believes they're smart." Sophia felt her heart squeeze with pride. "That sounds perfect. What about you, Lily?" "I want to be a veterinarian," Lily announced. "Animals need help too, and they can't ask for it like people can." "Also perfect." As they finished cleaning up, Sarah ran over with a piece of paper in her hand. "Mom, I drew you a picture." The drawing showed their family as stick figures, holding hands in front of a house. Jonathan, with his silver hair, David with his surgical scrubs, Elena with her stethoscope, Sophia with her curly hair, and all 5 children arranged by height. Above them, she'd drawn what looked like a sun with arms. "What's that?" Sophia asked, pointing to the sun figure. "That's Grammy Ruby," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "She watches over us from heaven." Sophia knelt down and hugged her youngest daughter, marveling at the intuitive wisdom of children. "She does indeed, sweetheart. She does indeed." That evening, after the children were in bed and the dishes were done, Sophia and David sat on their porch swing watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Good party," David said, taking her hand. "The best. Though I think we may have traumatized the neighbors with the noise level. They'll survive. Besides, Mrs. Peterson told me she loves watching our kids play. Says it reminds her that some stories have happy endings." They swung gently, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. In the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of the city. But here, in their corner of Westchester, all was peaceful. "David, do you ever think about how different things would be if Jonathan had said no?" That night, David smiled in the darkness. "You mean if he hadn't had the wisdom to recognize a gift when it walked into his restaurant? Is that what I was? A gift. You were a gift to him, and he was a gift to you. But more than that, your meeting was a gift to all the rest of us, to me, to our kids, to all the families the foundation has helped." One act of recognition and kindness rippled out into thousands of lives. Sophia leaned against her husband's shoulder, thinking about ripples and gifts and the mysterious ways that lives intersect and influence each other. "I got a letter today," she said, "from a social worker in Kenya. She'd read about our integrated care model and wanted to adapt it for refugee children. She said our work had given her hope that systems could change." "Are you going to help her?" "Already am." Sometimes I think Grammy Ruby's dream was bigger than even she knew. Not just that I'd become a doctor, but that I'd use everything I learned to help children everywhere feel like they matter. She'd be proud. She'd be, I hope so. Above them, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. In the house behind them, 5 children slept peacefully in their beds, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted and safe. Across the country and around the world, other children were going to sleep in less certain circumstances, but more of them than ever before were in loving homes, thanks to the work that had grown from one encounter in a Manhattan restaurant. "Want to know a secret?" Sophia said softly. "Always. Sometimes when I'm tucking the kids into bed, or reading them stories, or just watching them play, I think about that scared little girl who walked into Le Bernardin. And I want to tell her it's going to be okay. You're going to find your family, and then you're going to help other children find theirs. You're going to discover that love is infinite, and that families can be built on purpose, and that your story of loss will become a story of hope for thousands of other children." What else would you tell her? That Grammy Ruby was right. She was destined for great things. But the great things weren't about fame or recognition or even changing policies. The great things were about love, about learning to receive it and give it and multiply it until it becomes bigger than any one person or family. And that asking for help, asking, "Can I eat with you?" was the bravest thing she ever did. Because that question didn't just get her a meal, it got her a life. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other through their shared commitment to helping children, who had built a family that included birth children and adopted children and honorary grandchildren and a network of extended relationships that stretched around the world. In the morning there would be breakfast to make and children to get ready for school and foundation business to attend to and the countless small tasks that make up a life well lived. There would be scraped knees to kiss and homework to check and bedtime stories to read and all the ordinary miracles of family life. But tonight, there was just gratitude for the grandmother who had planted seeds of purpose, for the father who had chosen love over fear, for the husband who shared her dreams, for the children who called her mom, and for the mysterious grace that had transformed one moment of desperate hunger into a lifetime of abundance. The girl who had asked for food had grown into a woman who fed hope to the world. And the best part was that the story was still being written in the lives of her children, and the children they would someday help, in the families that would be formed, and the systems that would be changed, and the countless ways that love would continue to multiply and spread. 29 years after a hungry child walked into Le Bernardin, the question she'd asked that night continued to echo, "Can I eat with you?" But now it had evolved into something even more profound. Can we build a world where every child has a place at the table? The answer lived out in the daily choices of thousands of families and advocates and professionals around the world, remained the same as it had been that first night. Yes. Always yes. And in that, yes, the future was being written. One child, one family, one act of love at a time. Love multiplies rather than divides. Every child deserves to be seen, valued, and cherished. And sometimes, the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest act of faith, saying yes when someone asks you to share your table.